Let's see, it looks like I'm recording, so I'll go ahead and kick things off. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar series. We're so glad you could join us for today's webinar, Talking with TaxonWorks, Connecting Collections and Research. My name is Shyla Davison, and I'm the Education and Outreach Coordinator for iDigBio. And before we begin, I'd just like to take a few minutes to talk about iDigBio and the work we still have going on. As many of you know, iDigBio is approaching the conclusion of 15 years of support from the National Science Foundation. We have been approved for a no-cost extension, which will allow us to continue into 2027 as we complete project closeout activities. For the past 15 years, iDigBio has had an incredible impact supporting research, collaboration, and innovation on a national scale. This is not a moment of sadness, but one of transition. As this landscape evolves, NSF continues to fund biodiversity, digitization, and related efforts across the community, building on the foundation that programs like iDigBio helped establish. We're excited to continue these conversations and highlight the work happening across the field. We're proud to pass the torch to the broader community, confident that the mission of advancing biodiversity, digitization, and discovery will continue in capable hands. As we continue through this period of change, I wanted to share a few important updates about how iDigBio resources will continue to be accessed. The iDigBio website has transitioned to a simplified landing page that links the key resources such as the new GBIF-hosted iDigBio portal, the iDigBio Events Hub, and a few other things. An archive of the legacy iDigBio website and wiki is available through the Internet Archive. This archive preserves access to the information, but it is not intended to function as an active website. As part of this transition, data ingestion into the legacy data portal ended on May 1st, 2026. Content from the legacy iDigBio IPT, including user accounts, has moved to GBIF US IPT, so older links should be updated to the new location. As we close out this project, our focus is on preserving access to iDigBio's data and resources and helping the community prepare for these final transitions. I also need to share an urgent reminder for the collections with images or other media connected to iDigBio. iDigBio servers at the University of Florida will shut down in August. Any images or media stored on these servers will be permanently deleted, and access to the media and image files currently visible on the iDigBio portal will end on August 31st, 2026. To protect these files and keep them accessible through GBIF and other aggregators, you must complete 3 steps. First, move images or media to another permanent storage resource. Then, update the links or URIs in your specimen records to point to the new location. Republish the updated records to GBIF or other aggregators. All 3 of these steps are required. If any step is missed, the files may be permanently lost or become inaccessible. Unfortunately, iDigBio cannot complete these tasks for you. The Symbiota Support Hub team at the University of Kansas is aware that some active Symbiota portals include media or images stored on or linked to iDigBio servers. The team is working to transfer affected files to the University of Kansas infrastructure and update the links so the files remain accessible through Symbiota portals and other aggregators. If you have any questions, please scan the or if you want more information or have any questions, please scan the QR code on the image. And if you have additional questions, please contact Kat Chapman. Okay, with these transition updates in mind, I also want to take a moment to reflect on what iDigBio has accomplished and our mission that has guided our work. iDigBio began 15 years ago with the support of the National Science Foundation and the vision of its founding leaders. Over that time, we've made tremendous strides together as a community, and our shared efforts have helped shape the future of biodiversity research. At its heart, iDigBio works to make biodiversity specimen data widely available and useful through digitization, training, open access, and creative new applications. While iDigBio as a project will close, our mission and the data the community has generated will live on. So thanks to contributions from more than 1,000 biodiversity collections across 350 institutions in the US, the iDigBio portal has hosted nearly 150 million specimen records and 67 million media files from nearly 2,000 datasets. These data will continue to serve researchers, educators, students, and the public. And we're not done yet. As we move towards the conclusion of our project, we still have important work underway, including this webinar series. Our next webinar will take place on July 28th. These presentations will highlight protocols, practices, and strategies that can help support long-term continuations of collections digitization and data mobilization. Building on IDIG-Bio's focus on collections, digitization, data access, and community collaboration, this webinar will introduce TaxonWorks and explore how it supports research and collections. Our presenters will highlight features like ChecklistBank integration, exports, API use, digitization tools, and customization. The webinar will end with an open discussion where participants can ask questions, share challenges, and join the conversation. Before I hand things over to our speakers, I just want to mention that the chat function will be turned on. Please feel free to use the chat to join the discussion, and just remember to keep the conversation respectful or we will have to remove you. If you have a specific question for the presenters, please submit it through the Q&A feature and we'll get to as many as time allows at the end. So thank you for your understanding. Thank you for sitting through this introduction, and I'll hand things over to our speakers.
Thanks, Shyla, and thanks to all of IDIG-Bio's organization and everyone for reaching out to us and setting this up and managing the logistics and just becoming, being that community nexus or sort of catalyst that brings people together. So I'm going to start by saying, Shyla mentioned that there's going to be an opportunity for questions at the end, and really that's, if you've participated with us at all in the past, Debbie and I like to chat all the time. So we're going to try to have that Q&A flowing throughout the whole of this session and really try to make this interactive. Okay, I'm going to try to share my screen. As we're getting going, I'm just going to introduce, Debbie, maybe you introduce yourself and then I'll introduce myself. I always forget that and just assume everybody knows who we are. So Debbie, while I'm sharing, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. It's great to see you all here, people that I know and love and new faces too. And we are happy to be here. I am excited to be part of this, having been also part of the IDIG-Bio team in the past. And so it's great to see former colleagues here and still be part of this continued community effort toward connecting collections and research. My role on the project here is informatics liaison. So I act as the go-between, the space between empowering people to do what it is they need to be able to do. And that means developers who want to contribute to the code. It means people who are capturing data and want to learn more about coding. It means helping people be aware of what resources are what tools and resources are out there for them, and dreaming big about what it is they are wanting to do and trying to make that happen for them. That's me.
Okay, and I'm Matt Yoder. Often I think people probably go, oh, he's the TaxonWorks guy. But a little bit about me. I'm a taxonomist by training. I started at Texas A&M in sort of collections when I was brought down there for a master's. My assistantship was with John Oswald, and Ed Riley was a huge influence on me. And my initial goal there was my assistantship was to build the collections database that's there at TAMU. And I know some of you have interacted with that system and aspects of it kind of evolved. They were in the early era of building these collection databases and had been looking at Specify. We ended up using a lot of the Specify model way back then to do that. So from collections, I did sort of a traditional alpha taxonomy master's and then moved into a PhD also at Texas A&M entomology, where I did slowly more and more biodiversity informatics, a little bit of sequence alignment, a little bit of WebBench, building these applications that are the precursors to TaxonWorks. From there, I did a postdoc with Norm Johnson on alpha taxonomy, trying to do sort of taxonomy at scale. I think the grant was to describe around 1,000 species of platygastroid wasps. So we described a lot of species from all around the world. While I was there, I worked with Andy Deans and Katja Seltman and Istvan Miko to write the Hymenoptera anatomy ontology, which was an effort to sort of formalize how we describe the anatomy of the creatures that we're so interested in. And that took us to North Carolina State. From there, I came here to the species file group, and we'll say more about that group as we go. So to start, we like to be interactive. Let me see here. Can I see that? So we're going to do a couple polls to get people chatting in chat. So our first poll, we'd like you to type in chat one of the letters B, L, D, or S. And this is a little bit of semantics here. What we want you to do is to indicate which of these is closest to you. So if you're right in the middle, like if you were exactly in the time zone between breakfast and lunch, maybe you'd put BL. But if you just ate breakfast and you're closer to breakfast than lunch, you're going to put a B. If lunch is, you haven't had it yet, but it's 5 minutes away, then you're going to put an L and a D. So we just want to get people warmed up and typing in the chat. This also, kind of sneakily hints at where everybody's coming from, because we know where we're at, but maybe all of you are in the middle of the night. I'm looking for anybody that has an S, a midnight snack. Awesome participation in the chat. Snack and breakfast. SBs, those are the latest people. Matt, you're somewhere late.
I saw an S go by,
snack.
Matt.
I saw an SB, right? Like they're right in the middle between midnight snack and breakfast.
Breakfast. Oh my gosh. Oh,
New
Matt,
Zealand. Yeah,
New
there you
Zealand,
go, Matt.
yeah.
Had to be. Yeah, we've got a collaborator from New Zealand that's often there. A lot of lunch, so it feels like a lot of people that are local, and some folks that are maybe on the West Coast. It looks like a little bit more probably having breakfast while we are all in the middle of the morning. Okay, thank you, everyone. We're going to keep going with another little poll. Maybe we'll just put a dash in the chat to separate them. And we'd like to sort of get to know what your background is. How do you identify yourself? Do you identify yourself as having a role in collections? Put a C. If you have a role in research, put an R. If you have a role in IT or technology, put an I. And if you have a role in administration, put A. Some people can't escape doing everything. And this is really curious. So collections, research. Collections IT. Collections admin. Mario says collections research. Anna's Anna's unsure. I think if we're in collections or research, we're probably doing IT as well at some level. Okay, it's a good mix. And one of the things that we like to point out in this kind of question is that a lot of people are CR. And maybe from our perspective, as part of this overall chat and this presentation, collections, I think, at least the way we think of it here at Species File Group, are really part of research. They're just kind of the slow part of research at some level. Like we do some fast things in collections, but we do collections as part of research. And so that's really, I think, what we want to get at today. You heard Shyla note that iDigBio is at a 10-year anniversary. We're here at Species File Group, we're coming up to our second decade, actually, almost. But we're in our first decade anniversary as well in the development of TaxonWorks. So there's really a couple opportunities to talk about what's coming up next. So lots of CRIA. We would propose that maybe C and R are kind of the same thing, just at different time scales. And I is kind of all over the place, and we need good A as well. So maybe we're all doing these things. Collections use research infrastructure. Yeah, and research and they are the core of creating the data, Matt. I agree. They are they're a big part of it as well. And admin helps the whole thing tick and flow. All right, one last poll. We'd like to know how you, or if you have heard about us, and maybe this gives us a perspective of how deep we can jump in. Should we talk about some basics? Should we talk about some more advanced things? So some more letters. W, if you have participated in TaxonWorks Together. This is our annual meeting. We had our 7th one this year. F, if you've learned a species file group at a conference that's not TaxonWorks. S, if you've heard of the species file group. And if you've heard of TaxonWorks, but not the species file group. And you can type multiple ones. And P, if you have a TaxonWorks project. We didn't do this last second, you can tell, because there's no spelling errors. So I'm looking here. W, okay. I see a lot of familiar names. Hester, good to see you here. We've been chatting with the South Africans and heard of TaxonWorks, but not. So a lot of folks have kind of heard about TaxonWorks, but not species file group, which is kind of what we were starting to expecting. All new to you, Terry. Thanks. Erica, I remember your name at TaxonWorks Together. Thanks for coming again. Facebook, thanks, Annalie, for that. It's great. That's an iDig bio function, I think, because we're not, TaxonWorks and Species File Group are not on Facebook. We learned at a conference. Okay. Thanks, Mario. Zoom you, all new to you. Thanks, Stephanie. All right. So we want to say a little bit about the species file group, just because it's the bigger context. We are around 9 FTEs and a number of hourlies as well. The species file group is a bunch of wonderful people. They are all responsible for projects like TaxonWorks being successful. We are almost all cross-disciplinary, not quite, where we came from a biology background and then started to go into tech. We are ecologists, user interface designers, systems administrators, entomologists, biochemists, botanists. Jeff is an ecologist, Leslie studies bees, Yuri was a botanist, Dima studies plant hoppers. Phil is a biological informatician that joined INHS when we joined, so he's recently joined us. Heidi is a cockroach specialist. She does a lot of cataloging, and Tom is our most recent hire as a developer coming from the math field. So we're all kind of in biodiversity informatics, and we all have sort of a biological background, and I think that's one of the neat things about us. We work on projects not only like TaxonWorks that you'll hear a lot about today, but also the Catalog of Life. Jeff and Yuri are basically full-time collaborators or contributors to the Catalog of Life, the data pipeline, and the effort that's go there. And we'll touch a little bit about what we do internally with those guys. And we also host Dmitry Mozarin's Global Names Architecture. And maybe you could put a G in the chat if you've heard of the Global Names Architecture, and maybe Debbie we can link them, the global names there. So a marvelous set of tools that help you find names in documents, quickly access information on synonyms and that kind of thing. If you haven't heard about global names, you should definitely check it out, and we'll link to it. So the other thing that we've had is a lot of sort of opportunities for clarifying what the species file group is, especially related to some social media that's gone on in the little past. So the species file group is not dependent on selling you anything. We are an academic unit. We're part of the University of Illinois, the Prairie Research Institute, the Illinois Natural History Survey. We are not a company. We do not make or break our operation based on selling you something. We are a nexus of curious collaborators and collaboration. We're focused on biodiversity informatics. We're cross-disciplinary, as I said. We are global in scope. We probably have more global collaborators than we have local collaborators. We are pan-life, or across all of life. So while we have a lot of insect projects that we collaborate with, we really work with, try to work with all life. And we are endowment funded, which is this sort of unique aspect to us, and uniquely funded in a specific way. And this really gives us almost a globally unique position to contribute to the biodiversity informatics world. So also to help kind of clarify things and focusing in on TaxonWorks, actually, let's go back and let's ask, does anybody have any questions about species file group and what we sort of do, or I'll pause a little bit here. What we are, what we're not, do we do X, do we do Y? Hi, Josh, thanks for introducing yourself. Any questions about species file group? Okay.
Matt, I have one.
Yeah.
May I?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So I'm always curious what people think when they hear the name. And so where did this name come from? Why is it called the species file group? What the heck is that about?
Yeah, thank you, Debbie. That's a great question. Um, so this is a sort of a historical, we like to be traditional, but kind of cutting edge. We're taxonomists at heart, a lot of us, and that means 250 years of research. And a species file is what the Orthopterist Society called one of their early catalogs. So when our founder set up the species file group, they took that name for an Orthoptera project. One of the first projects they worked on was a catalog of Orthoptera. So that's sort of one of our big take-home projects. So while you're looking at it, you can kind of visit this project and get a feel. Debbie already beat me, thank you, to it. So yeah, that's sort of how we became the species file group. There was an Orthoptera project, the way I understand it, that was called the species file, a big catalog of Orthoptera taxonomy in the sort of traditional sense. And we've kind of adapted it. You can learn a lot more about species file group if you go to speciesfilegroup.org and learn a little bit. We've kind of adapted it: species, life on Earth, file, software, group, collaborating community. You can read about a little bit more about the history of our group here and how we collaborate, etc. We'll probably get into this a little further on as we go as well. Thanks, Debbie, for the question. All right. So towards TaxonWorks, this is, like I said, this is one of the 3 or 4 projects that we work on, at least, at minimum. We will work on much more here at Species File Group. So again, some comments and sort of questions and conversations we've had, we'd like to clarify. Again, TaxonWorks, we're not really talking with TaxonWorks here. TaxonWorks is software, where TaxonWorks is not a company. It's not a commercial product, and there's not a single instance of TaxonWorks. So you don't come to the species file group and only use TaxonWorks. You could be using a TaxonWorks, the application in a number of different ways. All right, so TaxonWorks is a biodiversity informatics application. It's software, it's open source, it's built in collaboration, it's for researchers and collections, and that's the essence of our chat today. It's an expert system, so we feel that taxonomists and collections have expert needs that are specific to their work, and we strive on trying to be cutting edge in how to meet those needs and think about those needs. And TaxonWorks is a private workbench. And by that, we mean that you're on the web, you have to log in, we'll demo that, and then you're working within the system. So there's no public access to the data that's there. Think of it as your own Microsoft Word copy that you're not sharing with anybody else. TaxonWorks can share data, as we'll get into, on the ABI, but really it's that workbench that you log in and you start your project and you work with people together in that project. What we're trying to do with TaxonWorks is to kind of create that workbench that helps you manage this. This is our legendary messy workbench photo. Can anybody just out of curiosity, anybody guess where this is from or whose desk this was? It's quite an old picture now. It happened out of some research where we were going to talk to people. We'll just kind of leave it open. I won't spoil it. But you can see that there's a lot going on here, right? There's observations being made. There's clearly a collections context. There's a whole bunch of books here. There's some late night long working. There's a whole bunch of organizing and figuring out species concepts. There's a lot of history. There's up here. There's a digital interface going on here. There's a process by which we're using alcohol. We're manipulating data here. We're communicating. There's just a lot going on here. We're illuminating the objects that are here. We've got a whole bunch of very precise, probably tools or organization, right? We're involved in this. And when I came into the field and I started describing species, I realized that a lot of this was going to be just organizing data, right? If I was going to describe species, I was going to have to publish that. And that was a lot of organization and work. And that's sort of that digital biodiversity informatics infrastructure that we're trying to do. There's computation that happens over here, right, with a calculator. None of this is staged. This was an in situ research image. And so we're trying to kind of provide tools that are useful at this very complex level. Do people's workbenches, look like this right now? Does anybody have this in front of them while they're watching this seminar on here? I'd love to hear it in the chat. And so today we want to talk about collections and research, and take the opportunity to think about how collections can impact research and how research can be impacted on collections, and sort of get at the nuances of their interplay. And there's going to be a quiz at the end, or maybe about 2/3 of the way through. We want to sort of talk with you and see about what are the top 5 things we can say about how collections are influencing research, or what do collections have to influence research, and what are the things that research can benefit from collections. So we're going to demo a bunch of things. We're going to talk about a little bit about TaxonWorks. We'll be very open and have you guys ask for certain things. But then at the end, we'll build this last slide together. So any questions so far before we got here? We're well into a half hour already. Quiet. While we're demoing this, we're going to get into showing off some things about TaxonWorks specifically. We want to point out that we at SFG have something called a sandbox, and this is a place to play in TaxonWorks. And you can request a sandbox at any time. I think Debbie's going to share a link, right, Debbie, with a Google Doc that you can write it in, and our internal team will watch that. And so if you want to be playing in a sandbox, you can go to sandbox.taxonworks.org and essentially play fearlessly. We do have to create the account for you. You can't create them de novo by yourself. We do have some guidelines that we like to have you read, just so you understand what's going on in a sandbox. But if any of you would like to sort of play along in the background, this is a great time to request a sandbox account in the document that's going to be shared. Yeah, Debbie just pinged it. And we will create you an account. Go, Debbie.
Yeah, we are reusing what we show you guys how we do this. TaxonWorks together. So here, I have left the names in there. Some people you will recognize them. Some of them are here at today's webinar. But if you add your name to this, and our team will get to you and get you an account while we're in the midst of this.
Cool. All right, and here's just a whole bunch of links that we're going to go. So to the demo. I think we have 4 or 5 things that we want to show off, but we're also really curious about you, the audience, and what specifically you'd like to see within TaxonWorks or learn about TaxonWorks. So again, we're going to be uncomfortably silent here, and maybe you can talk about, maybe you can in chat just list the topic that you would like to see specifically about TaxonWorks from what you know. Is it about images? Is it about sources? I won't go down the list. I'm kind of curious to see what people are interested in. And if it's a broad topic, broad overview, is it a brief intro? Is it specifically on some capacity? Let us know. What do you want to see? Are you here to look at TaxonWorks as a platform or potential solution for some of the work that you do? Or are you more interested in sort of ideas, like how do they do that? What's the cool parts? Thanks, Pete. Collections management. How do I get data in? Thanks, Jacob. Jacob is a regular with us now. He's really embraced how we like to work with people in the community. And Jacob's done some wonderful work with the code base. He's interested in getting data in. How about other people?
Jacob's work specifically most recently, was it biological associations, Matt? Was that?
Yeah, well, just in general with a Kukulion in a database. And for those of you who are have interacted with TaxonWorks, we may call on you for some feedback. Velasquez says more sources to work with collections. Mario, a practical example, taking a specimen from an entomological box. So digitizing, Mario, I think you're saying, is like, what would that look like? Pros and cons of TaxonWorks versus Specify. I think, we have to be transparent that we're not super familiar with Specify. We'll say a little bit more about that. And I don't think it's really the best idea for us to compare ourselves. But we're happy to answer questions. If you're familiar with Specify, you could ask us about TaxonWorks in relation to the feature that you know in Specify. Christine says, I want to use TaxonWorks for my research lab, smaller scale, but need organization. Awesome, Christine. I think maybe that's one of our strong points, and maybe that's who we're aiming at. David, very nice to see you. Hope all is well. Your canoeing social media, you should be posting that, is amazing and makes me very envious. How debts are applied to material, how authorized names lists are used and maintained, and the interplay between the two. Yeah, David, thanks. You're getting at one of the cool nuances that differentiate TaxonWorks from sort of other systems, in that, the interplay of using an OTU or a taxon concept and keeping that separate from the nomenclature that we can say. Matt, yeah, thanks. TaxonWorks to ChecklistBank, definitely. And we have a branch. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to show that. Maybe Tom in the background, our Tom, can think about getting me a branch information. And Dana just asks, what can TaxonWorks do? Yeah, fair. Awesome, thanks, folks. Others? No, nothing too trivial, nothing too advanced. Let us know. Terry, thanks. Image capturing software and storage, resources for current scientific names. Okay, great. Thanks, Debbie, for clarifying this. We're kind of using, those of you who have a taxonomy training, you'll know that OTU comes from a kind of a controversial time when we had, the cladistics versus the numerical taxonomists. And so we've kind of phonetics. Thanks, Matt. Yes, I'm doing a disservice to my graduate school trainers. But we're taking back the term and we're reusing it as a way to sort of mean a practical grouping, something to do work with. Others? We'll wait one more minute. Thanks, everyone. That's a great set of context for us. Actually, even though I work with OT and TaxonWorks concepts every day, I could use some more details about how they work specifically in the data model, the technical parts. Yeah. And Jacob, we're still making clarifications there that I think you'll probably get a better feel for directly on our chat channel. Thirty more seconds. So Debbie, looking at this list, what do you think we should hit first? A lot of great questions. And I think people are getting, for those of you who don't know TaxonWorks, you're getting sort of a feel for what we might be covering. What is the function of the sandbox? Great question, Terry. Thank you. So the sandbox is, Debbie, you want to take it away? I've been talking a lot.
No, it's fine. I was going to say that last question might be a good place to start, so that people can actually see the software. You have a sandbox open, Matt, where you have your own sandbox.
Yeah, I've got multiple sort of different ones here.
So Terry, in a nutshell, the idea is for you to be able to test the software, test drive it, play with the UI, figure out how it works, experiment with getting data in and out, in a place where you can't damage anything, you can't hurt anything. So then you discover what it will do, what it doesn't do, what it might be able to do. And so it gives you a chance to test drive the software with your colleagues.
Yeah, you can add people. You can explore existing projects. A lot of these projects are older examples. You can do it without fear. You can add yourselves to other projects. You really need to be cautious. You don't want to put any real data in there. There's no way to get data. It's not meant to be a staging platform where you first try to get your data right in the sandbox and then you take it to what we would call production, right? Which is sort of a real instance of TaxonWorks. We have multiple sandboxes at Species File Group. One is the public use one that we're showing here. But we also have ones where we've cloned the master instance of TaxonWorks into the sandbox, and people can run big complex batch operations on that data to see how it will look before they do those sets of steps on their production database. And that's one of the strategies that Jacob is sort of getting at. Mario says, yes, I want to manage my ecological, entomological questions for my university on TaxonWorks and then use the interfaces as standards for the collections. Okay. So we got collections. We have determinations, which part of the collections we could get at David's. A research lab. So Christine is kind of bridging maybe some collection vouchering kind of conversations with the specific research that is going on in that lab. Research and business. So like HPC Scratch. Yeah, Dana, I think that's a great analogy. Thanks. So a sandbox like HPC Scratchbase. Exactly. It's a way to get you really quick access. You don't have to fear about breaking anything, and you don't have to fear about breaking other people's things. A lot of people will test like the Dawn Core importer that we'll show in a second. They will import a lot of names. They will just kind of click around. They will play with for example, if I just choose a project here, and you come up to here, and I go to project, you can add users, and you can play with creating users. You can get a feel what basic management looks like, and you can do it without fear, Dana. Yeah. It's not. So in an HPC, you will have your home directory, the way I'll understand it, and then you'll have your scratch space, and then you'll have your real workspace. There's not quite that home directory analogy in this whole sort of triangle. Like we have the real space. So if I go to our real space, for example, is an instance of TaxonWorks. Remember, we said there's not just one TaxonWorks. So here's an instance that we, Species File Group, treat as the big one, right? There's other people who run their own servers and their own instances of TaxonWorks. You can also run TaxonWorks locally on your own machine. And this is a really important distinction. And maybe one of the things that differentiates us from all of the other platforms is that it's possible to download all of your data and practice with it, play with it, analyze it, add some scripts on top of the API locally on your own machine. Now, that's a sort of a one-way path, right? There's not this syncing from the local work that you're doing on your desktop back up, but it does give you a ton of flexibility. It lets you write the scripts that would let you then batch load data back into the system and practice with that code base. And that's probably a big differentiator, coming back to that specify versus TaxonWorks thing, is the code base. If we go to let's go to docs.taxonworks.org, and you go to develop and then install. There's a lot of different ways that you can do this. And we have a lot of collaborators who get going and just work it on. Terry, thanks. Yeah, another great question. It is an online database. TaxonWorks, when you use it, quote unquote, for real, the canonical or the primary way is to use it over the web. It's an online database. Yep. You can use it offline, and there are a couple researchers who use it completely offline. There's going to be a slightly slower performance, but all of the functionality that you would want to use as a management system is also available offline. It uses a database called Postgres. All of the components are free. Depending on how you install it, it's fairly straightforward. There's a bunch of different ways and operating systems that we support, and a bunch of different routes to installing it as well. So you can read more about that there. Heidi is a local, so full disclosure, folks, we pay Heidi. She does wonderful work with the Platodia species file. And so thanks, Heidi, for chiming in on what's going on there. Other questions before we sort of go back?
So Matt, I'm curious about the person I'm looking here. Oh, so Parvana, can you tell us, like, if you know specify, as Matt pointed out, what are you interested in, what TaxonWorks does or doesn't do, if you're familiar with what specify does do? What do you have a specific question? And maybe you could turn on the mic if you'd rather talk. Because we might be able to work that into where we're headed next with some demos.
Yeah.
I do know a bit, but I've heard the data model varies. Yeah, yes, the data
Yeah.
model is different.
Okay,
Mhm.
so, but you heard me, maybe, Parvana, that we were heavily influenced, the species file group and the thinking behind TaxonWorks was heavily influenced by projects like Specify, by Darwin Core, attributes, the thinking there. Debbie, you didn't introduce that you were, in your introduction, that you were the head of TADWIG for a couple of years.
Mhm.
So we have a lot of ties and we're fairly familiar with a lot of these standards and we're heavily influenced by a lot of those ideas. So we may be a little different, we may be a little same. Just to point out that when you're talking about the difference in data models, you can come down in the docs.taxonworks.org and you can come to data, and then under data there's a sort of an overview about how we think about data here. And I think this is probably an underutilized set of documentation in general. And then these are some diagrams that are actually kind of dynamically generated and inserted into this. But you can get a really good feel for down here at the models that you see here. You can kind of get an idea of the scope of what we cover here. I think in general, again, not to compare ourselves, but Arctos has a lot of similar like depth of models. We have a very broad coverage in TaxonWorks. And so here's a lot of different things that you see, the different models here. And maybe that's a good way to segue into the actual application. So here I'm in the sandbox and I'm looking, actually I'm going to go to the collections example here. Where did I want to go? Sorry, you're going to have to dance with me for a second. 42. So I'm in the production version. So here I don't want to do bad things. And here I'm at the INHS Insight collection. So we worked with the collection staff here, Tommy McElrath, to do a lot of the work in the digitization front in TaxonWorks. And I should give you a bit of background. TaxonWorks was originally built more as a research platform. You know, our sort of canonical use was things like these Orthoptera species files, which are really modern digital catalogs with a lot of different things going on. And so that's sort of that original focus. My original work in a platform called MX was to help describe species, manage specimens for taxonomic revisions. Dmitry Dmitriev wrote a program called 3i. He was doing the same thing. It would actually generate descriptions of taxa. And so TaxonWorks came from that perspective. Because we needed to manage specimens, right? Who of you here has described a species and managed specimens in that process? Maybe you could put a 1 in the chat if you've worked on that. When you've done that, Christine, thanks. Yeah, Hester, thanks. When you've done that, you are managing a lot of loans, right? For that project with Norm Johnson's lab, there was probably 20 or 30 loans that we had for one project, right? So that means that us as researchers needed to manage a collection, a small temporal local collection. And we needed to know where to send all those specimens back, right? And so the systems that we built slowly merged into sort of saying, wait a minute, the things that we need in our collections, yeah, there's some different specifics, but there's a lot that's very similar to researchers, right? So when I need to manage 20 loans, I would like my database to tell me where to send these back, and I would like to track them. And I need to also report in my material examine sections where those collections were. So those metadata and those data were not just something in the domain of the collection, they were in the domain of the researcher. And so you can see the sort of feature creep, right? You can see the sort of evolution of what happened in TaxonWorks was we built these, we had these set of tools, and then we're like, wait a minute, we kind of have like a lot of what a collection might need coming from a different perspective. And that led us to really dig down and focus and say, okay, let's try supporting collections. We have around 10 or 11 now that are permanent collections in TaxonWorks. And let's see what it locks in. And so sort of our canonical one is obviously the INHS, the Illinois Natural History Survey, where there's over 1 million specimens here in this system. So this is the INHS project. And I wanted to tie back to that data model part that I showed you. When you first come to TaxonWorks, there's kind of 3 different views. We call this the hub, where you kind of, it's like your home page. And it's going to look a little different from a lot of other software that you've seen, either desktop or kind of web-based software. And a lot of the coolness that comes in these interfaces, all thanks to Jose. He's in the chat here, our user interface specialist. So we have a full-time person working on user interface development. So there's 3 sort of components up here. There's tasks, and these are you can think of this as like an app store. Each of these little cards is a way of linking these little data. David Shorthouse was asking, how do I link taxon names to specimens, right? Like, what's that process look like? And so one of these tasks, for example, this comprehensive specimen digitization task, links many of the different data models into one place, into one context. And down here, this is not how you would want to do industrial digitization. This is like, I want to go to this place and do everything I can imagine that TaxonWorks can do in one spot. So maybe you just have to digitize a single type specimen, for example. So you would maybe come here, and it's all in one spot, which is not super efficient in some ways, but it is kind of a necessary perspective. And so down here, we'll see that when we wanted to apply a determination to a collection object, what we call a specimen in TaxonWorks, there's a bunch of options to tie a determination, which is actually a link to an OTU. It's not a name, right? So it's a concept. You are classifying this as this specimen falls into this taxon concept. And that taxon concept happens to have this taxon name. So here's the determiner, the person, when the determination was made, and you can stack and add these things. So you can add, we don't, of course, I think all modern systems now, you don't just have one determination on your specimens. You can record the whole history of how this specimen bounced around.
Matt, can we go back up to the top for just a minute?
Thanks for the guidance. Yep.
Sure. So at the very top, for just like maybe 2 minutes, y'all time me. Let's just look at the UI, because I know it's really different from what most people might be familiar with from their own experiences with different collection management software. And the main developer of our user interface software is in the room today. So if any of you also have questions, but you'll notice at the top right, there's this thing called layout settings. So for example, you could customize what you see or don't want to see there. And just underneath that, you'll notice where it says save and new. You can also look at each box and you'll see a lock feature. You see it's kind of there. See that lock? And so you could imagine that you're doing something and everything's the same except for one particular field. So you could lock all those things and then do save and new and get a new record with everything filled out except for that thing. It's sort of different but parallel in a way to some of you who are familiar with Symbiota, where you would want to clone a record because it's the same collector, for example, but a different plant, but it's the same collecting event. Here you can see, oh, wait, Matt, go back up. That's okay. That's okay. So then we have catalog number, repository, preparation, which you guys are familiar with. And for those of you who are interested in data standards, please put your hand up at some point and volunteer at Tadwig to form an interest task group and develop something we've needed for a long time, which is controlled vocabulary world for preparations. Anyway, I'll say more.
I'll interrupt you there, Debbie.
Go.
Chris Marshall and I, Chris Marshall is the insect curator at Oregon State, are actively, and this is some other work, we're actively thinking about this and formalizing this, what we would call a preparations ontology, and getting at exactly what this is. So please do actually reach out this. We've just been in conversation and Chris has kind of lit the fire again. This is a mess, right? Like this has got numerous issues. And for those of you who would like to participate and think about these kind of aspects, also we have this whole container world within TaxonWorks. That's going to be part of this preparation ontology. So do reach out if you're interested. And I'm not sure how the best way to announce that is, Debbie, or go.
I don't either. I was going to say 2 things. One, the link I just put in the chat, I'll have time to go dig it up inside that repository. If those of you are interested in this topic and want to understand more about the background, because maybe it's newer to you. If you go to this Darwin Core Hour repo, there is a great talk put together on this topic and the need for it. And then we can talk more, Matt, about the best way to get out the door.
Yeah, just
Okay,
just
what did you
know
want
that
to?
there's going to be some effort.
Yes.
Sorry, Debbie, go back, and then I'm gonna segue into Pete's question.
Okay, I'm gonna go quickly then. I just want to go down the page. So keep going. Buffered is a kind of verbatim. The idea here would be when you're doing data capture in a very quick way, then you're going to parse it later. And we have some parsing tools to help you with that. Depictions, again, you want to depict something about this particular thing. You can drag and drop images, for example, or figures there. Citations. So is this thing cited in a source? Do you want to record that and what page that citation is on? Keep going, Matt. Yeah, attributes are locked into, oh, Matt's showing you the sources popping down. Keep going. So then we can also do, in the concept of not only a lot, but this notion of, you can see here, cast, life stage. So you're trying to say something about the biological nature of that entity. Here's where you can specify, and you can control all these vocabularies and link them to the kinds of ontologies that Matt mentioned. Keep going, Matt. Matt talked about determinations. Here, you'll notice the little orange bar by determination and the little orange bar by collecting event. This is trying to tell you that these are separate parts of the TaxonWorks data model. So this is nested, that concept for you here, so you don't have to go to another screen to add your collecting event. Keep going, Matt. Down the page. You can add fields that you need. Matt might talk about that. We call them data attributes. Yep, he's showing you some at the bottom. Keep going. So if it's type material, you can specify what kind of type material. Keep going. And Pete has a great question. Can you select multiple preparations for various parts, Matt?
Yeah. Okay, so we'll hand that off. And
Okay.
then we'll come back to David's question about
Yeah.
taxon names and OTUs and talk about
Yeah.
this as well. So Pete, the quick answer is yes. We have very high level of granularity. So I'm going to switch quickly to the sandbox and I'm going to go to the same one. So here I can, without fear, add some specimen records. And so this is going to look a little different. Let's see if I go there, because it's an older version and I probably did some layout settings. Let's just turn all these back on just for fun. Okay, so here let's choose a namespace for our identifier, and then I'm going to type 123 123. Just we can lock, and then when we clone, this will increment. These are all standard features, I think, in all the different places. I'm going to do INHS again. A repository is not the same as a namespace. We can get into that a little bit different. This is the physical location where we've managed this. If you're familiar with grcycol, this is a reference to something in grcycol, ultimately. And let's see if I'm just going to save this. So I can save a very minimal specimen, right? There's not a lot of requirements for a basic specimen. Now, down here, what I've saved is I've saved one. My total is 1, Pete, and I can make this a worker that's adult, and if it's an adult worker, it's probably a female, if it's an ant there. And let's see, worker or adult. Yeah, these are just all of the options that are there. Now, imagine I wanted to say, imagine this is a pin, Pete, and it's got 4 ants stabbed on that pin, right? I can add directly. It means that there's one catalog number that is INHS. It's a physical specimen identifier on the specimen, printed out. But there's 3 specimens on that pin. And so here I've added another one. So here's my first one. It's been virtually associated with that catalog number now instead of directly associated with it. And I can say, oh, actually there's another one, and this is the queen. It's an adult. Obviously it's female. So we can add that to the container. And we can go on and on to manage all of these. Now, each of these specific objects can be fully annotated then. So this will be a nice segue to show you one of the really powerful things in TaxonWorks is this annotation system. And all objects can be annotated in a little different ways. So whenever you see these little, looks kind of like a little caterpillar curled up maybe, a little target of pie slices, whatever your sort of metaphor of choice is, you can click on these and you'll see that there's two different ones. These are two different physical things in TaxonWorks with two different sets of attributes. Actually, there's three now. And so I can come and I can click and I can see that in the background, we've created a UUID for this physical collection object. That's the default data point that gets sent out to GBIF in the Darwin core. And now I can add other little things. I can add notes, I can add tags, I can cite this specimen, but not the other specimen. I can drop pictures for that specimen onto that specific one, but not the others. So essentially we have very fine-grained capacity to annotate all of these different individual specimens that are associated with one catalog number or just, virtually in some way in that lot. Hopefully that answers. Okay, and so yeah, that, and I want to come back to David's question here. You see that he was asking about the relationship between taxon names and determinations. You see that there's actually, the type material is the only place where we directly link a taxon name data object to a collection object, right? And that's because species group names, at least in the ICCN, have a type, a physical type. And so that name has a one-to-one relationship with that specimen, okay? Or not necessarily one-to-one, but it has a specific one. So this is a special relationship that links a physical specimen to the nomenclature, which is another core component that we do very nicely in TaxonWorks. One of the other differences between TaxonWorks and a lot of the other platforms is that we have excellent nomenclatural handling. We can dive into that if people are interested. So that gets at another nuance, differentiating things that we think of as names, these strings of letters, and their relationship to the physical objects. There's one kind that has to do with nomenclature, and there's other one that says, this is my taxon concept. Even if it has the same name, we know as taxonomists that just because we use the same label, we might not be talking about the same thing. For those of you familiar with Nico Franz's RCC5 data, and Debbie, I know you're already thinking about that wonderful paper that just came out. We can link to that concept for those of you who want to go down that wormhole. So we can facilitate that in TaxonWorks. Another thing that we just glanced over is that there's a biological associations relationship data type in TaxonWorks. So you can link specimens to specimens, specimens to taxa, field occurrences to taxa, and there's an anatomical part as well. We could say a little bit more about this, but there's very rich, very fine-grained, Pete, just like we can annotate any single little individual, we can create very complex, rich biological associations in TaxonWorks. And we could say more about that if people are interested.
So I'm really interested quickly, Matt, then. How many of you here is OTU a new concept? Can you put like a...
And then I would add new, especially in the context of collections, Debbie. Yeah?
Okay.
Yeah? Or I mean, like it's...
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
so can you just put an N for new, if it's new to you in the context of collections? So if this was a new idea to separate the name from the nomenclature, from the taxon concept. And yep, Jess, thanks for that. Yep. So I would just say briefly that paper that I linked there, for those of you that the idea, for those of you for this, who this is new, you could imagine, I come from the botany world. So I'm imagining the herbarium, all these herbarium sheets spread out all over these tables everywhere. And somebody who's trying to either perhaps lump or split or figure out where something they collected fits because it might be new or not, but they're trying to look at and compare visually. they've got all these sheets and they're trying to organize them and group them in ways that make sense to them at the moment based on their expertise, right? And so you might discover that some of those things overlap, some of those things intersect. So they share some properties, but not all the properties. They might be completely disjoint. They're clearly two separate things to you from a morphological standpoint. And so RCC5 is this region connection calculus, this fancy, it's sort of maybe scary sounding for some of us name, but it's really cool in that it sort of gives you the idea that you can build a database that allows you to visualize that. Do my concepts overlap? Do my concepts intersect? Are they completely separate? So anyway, I wanted to finish with that. So the idea is, in order to be able to do that, though, you have to keep nomenclature separate from your concepts that you're still playing with. You give them morpho species names, temporary names, and you're organizing them on the table. We can give another example later. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah. So I want to keep going. Pete has ask the next question. So we know that we can, you saw, Pete, that you can apply multiple sets of attributes to individuals associated with the same catalog number. And as of about 6 months, thanks to work from Tom Klein, who's also in the room, I think, we've implemented interactions with the anatomy ontology world. So this formalization, you remember I was saying I worked with the Hymenoptera anatomy ontology. And that lets us, Pete, make even more explicit relationships. So very simply visualizing it, and we won't get too much into it here. Here's my collection object, just sort of represented. And this is a new class of data called an anatomical part that doesn't have to, reference an anatomy ontology, like the Hymenoptera anatomy ontology. If you're in plants or insects, actually, if you're in vertebrates, plants, or insects, do check out the anatomy ontology world. There's a wonderful group of people. We can provide a couple of links as well there, but they're really great at helping to think about how we can sort of take formalizations of our anatomy and work them into our data. And TaxonWorks, we've long planned to have this integration, but as of this last 6 months, we have it now. So here's another relationship. The collection object, this is a physical thing. An anatomical part is a physical thing that has an origin relationship with this collection. So this anatomical part has the origin of this collection object. Then I can take extracts, multiple extracts. This is not just a one-to-many. Like I can have many actual physical parts. This is the actual physical gaster of this collection object. And this is an actual physical extract from this anatomical part. And you can imagine this graph having lots of connections. Here's the sequence that has the origin of this extract. So these are all aspects of the model. Now, full disclosure, these three things are fairly well worked out. There's lots of tools and user interfaces to work with this, not this. There's a data model, we can represent the data, but TaxonWorks as a storage, as a tool to actively work on sequence data is not there yet. We hope to make some significant inroads, particularly with one of our collaborations on this big crayfish taxonomy project where they're doing exactly what we're describing with OTUs, right? This is Bronwyn's project down in North Carolina, where they're doing a lot of crayfish surveys and they don't have names for these things, or these names concepts are all changing. And so they need to have a place to work without concrete certainty of the names. And they're, of course, using a lot of DNA barcoding. There's a lot of need for that kind of dark taxa, like efforts like Rudolf Meyer's group is working on. So we do hope to make some inroads for basic sort of sequence handling. We do have excellent matrix handling. So for those of you who are familiar with, maybe you can put an X in chat if you're familiar with the Nexus data format. If you've done any kind of phylogenetic work, so put an X in chat if you know the Nexus format. So we have full Nexus support, and at a very fine granular level, you can, again, annotate, that same radial annotate, you can add images, etc., to not just taxa, but actually specimens and actually parts. And field occurrences, that kind of thing as well. All right. Questions that are there. I think we're going to go back. And maybe I'm slightly lost, but I'm going to go back in reverse. So Terry, you asked a great question. If your data are already in another database, does it make sense to duplicate data in TaxonWorks as a database? That's a great question, Terry, for context. I think I'm going to rephrase it, and maybe the question is like, what should you use TaxonWorks for, and what shouldn't you use it for? What's the sweet spot of TaxonWorks? One of the sweet spots of TaxonWorks is you want to collaborate on a data set with multiple people over time. So, there's some longevity aspects to it. The other one is that database, the project, is the source of truth. Okay, so you could think of using TaxonWorks, the software that is part of Species File Group, as a backup. However, that gets into lots of issues with how Species File Group collaborates. So remember, TaxonWorks is software. It's not like iNaturalist, right? iNaturalist is the software, but it's only in one spot. All of the data are there. It's the whole community. It's the whole package. Remember, TaxonWorks is software by itself. So you could put TaxonWorks on your desktop, and you could download the data, and you could use that to manage your backup if you wanted to. If you came to Species File Group and said, I want to back up my images from iDigBio because I'm uncertain of where they're going, Debbie and I would have a conversation with you, and that conversation would look a lot like this. This is a good segue. Our conversation would look a lot like this. If you come to collaboration on the chat here, yeah, Debbie's already posting the norms and the thing. If you click on this working with us, this is the kind of conversation that Species File Group will have with you as collaborators. We talk, right now at least, we're fortunate enough to have all of the projects that work with Species File Group we think of them as collaborators, just like you would collaborate with your lab mates. And we would kind of evaluate, is it a good idea that we take all of these images from iDigBio and put them in a project? And we'd have that discussion from you. And we have a lot of requests for collaboration, like more than we can handle, right? This is a good sign. And so we have to, of course, prioritize things, and we have to be transparent about when we can get to that work. And I'll be honest, if you said, I just want to back up my images and nobody's going to work on them, and I just need a spot to put them, we would guide you to something like Zenodo, for example, or another repository, right? We're really interested in having a data set that is live, that's being actively curated, that's part of a research platform, where the community is going to be engaged in these conversations with us, where they're going to join our chat, where they're going to come to our Wednesday help sessions, where they're going to file issues on our issue tracker, where you're going to help us learn how to improve the software and take the time to do that. So it's a give and take, right? And just having those images in our software is maybe not the best, highest priority for us. If you said, hey, I've got 6 people and we need to take our images because we're going to start building a phylogenetic matrix, and we want to build, an atlas for this state, and we'd like to have a little bit of keys, and we want to have a matrix, and it's going to actively grow. Oh man, that's a different conversation. That's great for us. That's what we love to hear. Debbie.
I think that's a good segue to mention too. You brought it up loosely. I noticed there's another webinar coming up soon at iDigBio that mentions field stations data. And we also are interested in facilitating the relationship between ecological research that's often grounded in things like field occurrence data with collections data and bridging that. So we have an example, one of our current collaborators, Bronwyn Williams from the North Carolina Museum of Nature and Science. I think that's right. She is currently working on a collaborative grant with, I think, 3 different states. They are crayfish researchers. They are state agencies across 3 different states, plus collections. So they have to navigate things like data sharing agreements. They have to navigate access to, working together? How are they going to put their data in the same resource together? So they have to have some very complex conversations along with facilitating what is it they want to be able to do? What's the science? And so we have the ability to sort of address it's in addition to where your data goes and who can work with it, it's what do they want to be able to do? And how can we facilitate that intersection across the space? And so we've built some really cool new features and functions in TaxonWorks in collaboration with the needs of this research project. And it bodes well for this connection of collections and research across different groups like ecologists and researchers working with collections data. Matt?
Yeah. Okay, we're getting a little bit behind, and people are asking great questions.
They are.
So I just wanted to reiterate, Pete, if you didn't get it, yes, anatomical parts have all of the nice properties of a physical thing that a collection does. So here's my anatomical part. I can right click it and I can pull up the annotator, the forms, etc. And I can annotate, add images, all of those other separate data attributes I can do with an anatomical part, just like a collection object. So we can get into further detail, but yes, the semantics and the interfaces are there to add your own catalog numbers, etc. on top of it. Okay. I want to go all the way back, folks, before, just make sure we didn't lose anybody at the top. Debbie, is there, going back up, I just want to make sure we didn't miss anybody other's questions before we get back to David and the next questions. So Jacob did talk about batch importers, and I think maybe it's, in the interest of time, maybe it's worth going back and showing that core Darwin Core importer and Darwin Core export just really briefly. Debbie, you think that's, I mean, I think it's so fundamental to research software now. You've got to have this, right? And
Sure.
So we could just sort of show what that looks like without too many details in TaxonWorks.
Yeah, you could just show, I
I'm
guess,
just going to show the two screens.
production,
right?
the two
Yeah.
screens. Yeah, you
Yeah.
could just show INHS production where
Yeah.
Tommy, there's a
Yeah.
lot that went in through the importer.
Yeah.
And while Matt's describing that, all of you that have experienced different software CMSs have some sort of platform for upload. And this is ours.
Yeah. So this is our Darwin Core importer. And it lets us go from, let's just go from rows to things, you know, those little connected stick and ball diagrams that you saw. So here's the insect collection. I'm just trying to find one. You can see there's a status, right? You can have rows that errored and kind of work with them over time. So here's some records from David's, Derek Sykes, that I think many of you know. That we're coming into the insect collection. You got a kind of classic table. This has already been imported, and if we won't say much about this. There's a lot of fields that we map to, maybe 50 Darwin Core fields. However, we also in our importer let you map to native TaxonWorks fields. So TaxonWorks is much more than just Darwin Core. It's not governed by Darwin Core. Darwin Core is an index that we use at the end. So you can import Darwin Core fields, you can import to TaxonWorks fields, and then you can import to your own data attribute fields, your own custom columns. 3 different ways of creating your spreadsheet to enter in your data, which gives you a lot of flexibility. And you know, the endpoint here, when we're browsing this specimen that they imported, is a georeference specimen, right? Depending on your data, you can have very minimal data, et cetera. It's got determinations, repositories, biocuration tags, multiple identifiers that are occurring here that give you a history. There's the Darwin Core file that is exported. And we have this little software called gbifference. So this is actually calling to gbif to see how gbif changed the data. And as we do these things, there's like conversations that we can have with Jose. Jose, I think we had this colored as a warning. Maybe we could bring that back. So here we gave our Darwin Core file going out, use this string, preserved specimen, and this is what gbif did to normalize our data. So, and this is also interesting. Here's one of those problems or interesting things that went on. We use the determination of a taxon name that's linked to a taxon name to Sylphidae, and gbif placed that in Staphylinidae. which is probably okay in some sense. This is all related to the Darwin Core data, sorry, the ChecklistBank data that goes in as well. And we can say a lot more about that.
Jumping in really quick, I just wanted to say for those of you who are familiar, what Matt is saying is most of you are familiar with feedback, either from IDIG-Bio or GBIF or ALA, but you usually have to go get the CSV files they produce to tell you what they might have tweaked about your data or find it interesting that you should know about. And here we pull that data into TaxonWorks for you directly from GBIF, and that's this GBIFerence tool.
Yeah, which is a separate library that you could use in other projects. Like the code is not specific to TaxonWorks, we should say.
Yeah.
So this is really interesting, right? Like we just happened to hit a nice one. Like often it's not like this. GBIF feels that this was not the original place of this species, right? So they've changed the determination. They said this is a subsequent combination of DEF-ODNs. So that's interesting. Species, etc. There's also like a little timeline that kind of shows you the main data objects. How did this object come to be? One of the things that I like to show that's kind of abstract, and David, sorry, I always click the wrong one here. David, you've made this comment, and Debbie and I had this comment. David Shorthouse, sorry, if there's multiple Davids. Not related. I do this multiple times. I want to go all tasks and I go this graph. There's a way to visualize. So remember, we started with a single row. We started with this row of data in Excel file. And in TaxonWorks, we don't think of rows of data, we think of things. That's another sort of philosophical. So it turned into many, many different things, right? Identifiers are separate things, people are separate things, and all of these things can be annotated. There's Linnaeus down there as an author. Here's a georeference, it's a separate thing. So there's your collection object. All of these are different little records. We went from a system where it's kind of hard sometimes to parse out, like, what is this about? Well, this is about a name, or is it about a determination, or is it about the nomenclature? Well, here we've separated that out. It's about a name, and that gets you to an OTU, a taxon concept at some point. Right? Or I think this is the OTU. Yeah, this is the taxon name. There's an OTU that gets used in a determination, etc. Okay. Coming back to David's asking all the hard questions. Preparation ontology, but he's got another one down here. Let's see.
I thought the one at the bottom there that he just asked.
Does TaxonWorks require a managerial hierarchy of taxon names from which they are drawn and used in a fully relational sense or on determinations? So no, technically no, David. You can use completely anonymous OTUs that are not linked to the nomenclature at all. You never have to touch nomenclature if you don't want to. Nomenclature as a proxy lets you interact, of course, in a lot of different ways. But technically the determination does not require any nomenclature. It requires an OTU that has either a label, a temporary label, right? Like my species or ASB. And we can get it, it's not really the spot, but we've worked out the semantics nicely now. That leads to another nice demo. Sorry, I'm thinking ahead here a bit. But the essence is, the real take homes is no, you don't need it. There is only one hierarchy of nomenclature. So, and that hierarchy means something very specific. It means, in TaxonWorks, it means that if you knew nothing else about a taxon name, where would you look for it? Like you knew literally nothing else, where's the spot you looked at it? So let's switch to try to give you a little more clarification without completely confusing everybody. Let's go, sorry. Switch projects. So this is browse taxon names. This is nomenclature. This is not, this is strictly to manage the names as they're governed by the ICZN. And if we drill down here a little ways, and this is the Orthopter project, one of the probably the most remarkably rich biodiversity informatics data sets in the world, I would argue. Look for their new paper that's coming out where they brought in millions of records from GBIF and lots of other sources, and they normalized it against the APIs that are in TaxonWorks and Catalog of Life to kind of get that data all standardized. And now they're thinking about how to push it back into TaxonWorks and visualize it and work at a sort of really broad scale. So very cool things happening with the orthopter world. So see this hierarchy here. These colors kind of indicate that hierarchy. That's the parent relationship for this name. But really, that relationship means very little in the respect of nomenclature. Like for those of you who are taxonomists, you want to get to these, essentially these nomenclatural catalogs that are highly, highly detailed. And there's lots of different aspects. So this looks like a simple linear way of laying out the data. We could show the paper catalog that you can generate from this. You can create a catalog that's ready for print in documentation or an ebook format. And so really, yes, there's a parenthood, but it really is, nomenclature in TaxonWorks is about the details on that name. If that helps there. We do not have multiple phylogenetic relationships. So there's no, if you're familiar with the Open Tree of Life site, they manage phylogenetic trees, which relates taxon concepts to taxon concepts, not nomenclature. And there has to be, one concept can have many different hypotheses. We don't have that in TaxonWorks. It'd be nice, but it's not a priority. We do have taxon name relationships, OTU relationships. So the plant folks, names escaping me, Cam Webb and his collaborators in the botany world are creating these RCC relationships that Debbie related to. So you can express those relationships, which inherently builds a network. It's not a hierarchy. It's not a distinct non-looping hierarchy. It's a network of relationships. So you can express that in TaxonWorks as well. If that hopefully answers.
I don't know if that helps y'all, but for me, what it really helps is instead of seeing in my brain taxonomy and the history of nomenclature listed as a sort of list, like this and then this and then this, and sort of a list of names or citations, all of a sudden it becomes imagery, right? Where you can see the relationship between the names as they've been lumped or split or otherwise treated, becomes synonyms, for example, becomes something you can graph.
Similarly, David, I'm going to say that there's no such thing as good. If we think that taxon names are hard to manage at a global level, and they are very, very hard to manage, maybe there's impossible too. If you think just taxon names and nomenclature is hard, then the nomenclature and what geographic names means is like another level of crazy. And so we think of geographic, custom spatial entities as being spatial assertions, right? When we georeference, we can georeference not just as a point and a radius, but as a shape, as any kind of geospatial representation that you want. And so as of, again, thanks to Tom's work last year, we have the ability to create your own geospatial, we call them gazetteer entries. So TaxonWorks has a core that can't be changed only by administrators, essentially multi-use geographic area set of references. So think of all of the geopolitical units from level country, state, and county down, levels 0, 1, and 2, for those that don't have country, state, or county. However, you can create your own entities now. And so here, the Orthopterus group and Hernan took a lot of ecological entities and added those all into the system. And then these can be used in the search and the filtering capabilities that are there, et cetera, in that sense. So there's no one hierarchy here. It's useful to have a management classification. I think everybody in collections here is useful to knows the concept of a management classification versus a phylogenetic classification versus a nomenclatural classification. But at the moment, we don't have custom classifications for gazetteer entries. We do have the core classification for what we call geographic areas. All of the geographic areas, one of the other things we'd like to point out is if you were with us on TaxonWorks together, there's another great resource, and it sort of gets at where we're thinking about where to go in the future with the geospatial side of it, called GeoNames. It's a project called GeoNames. And we would like to start integrating tightly with that group, and
You mean
probably
geo
will.
boundaries, Matt?
Sorry, not GeoNames, GeoBoundaries. Thank you, Debbie. Yes.
Welcome.
Yeah.
I will put a link.
And David, I'm sure we're not getting to the nuances. For your intents and purposes, I think where you're getting at, I think things are slightly simpler than what you would want, maybe, but also pretty rich in the long run. Okay, we have about half an hour left. I want to definitely come back to the conversation, but that we talked about the nuances back and forth. Does anybody else have questions? And did we miss anybody? Would you
Yeah,
like
maybe
to?
we take a minute now and just wait.
Yeah, I'm just going to pause for a bit. It's very hard for us to get through everything because it does a lot.
It does. That means we invite you to come on any Wednesday and join us
That's
for
really
free.
what we're getting.
You
Yeah.
do not have to be a user of TaxonWorks or our other software in order to come to our meetings, learn more about what we do, ask your questions, find out how what work we do could be used by you or linked to by you or added to by you, or how it could help your community. So it's part of the conversation. How do we collaborate?
I realized that we didn't show the Darwin Core export to GBIF.
We did not.
I'm going to just do that. Well, I'm going to say it quietly. I'll just
Okay.
cue it up quietly. But while you guys are all thinking about what else would make a difference without getting further lost in this blast of information?
For sure. I'm answering some of the questions that are popping up too, and so are Heidi and others too. So Matt, guys, your question, can you customize views to suit workflows? I have to get you to talk more about what you mean. I would say what you can do, Matt briefly went to the tasks tab. What you can certainly do is create a list of tasks that you're going to work through or work from. And you don't have, there's something like more than 80 tasks in there now. You don't have to sift through all of them every single time you want the path that you're taking. Matt's showing that now too. So you can customize which ones. This is another way for you to customize if somebody's going to log in, like a student or a new person to the database. So they don't have to be overwhelmed by the list of 80 things. All right, Matt, you want to segue to how do we get data to GBIF?
Yeah, and David just perfectly let in. Does TaxonWorks talk to
Lovely.
GBIF registry API and the way that their IPT does so that replication is near hands-off and automated? As of several months ago, again, thanks to all our developers, yes, completely hands-off. And we have N equals, I don't know, it's a handful of people that are doing it not only for collections, and this is maybe a nice segue, but researchers are also doing it. So this is a very simple, essentially for those, many of you are familiar with IPT and getting your data in. And many of you have used, and one of the great services of iDig Bio was the kind of, or software like Symbiota that was managed by people with facilitating roles, was that they got your data to GBIF. And now TaxonWorks has this built in. And essentially, it's a simplified configuration file. It lets you export the core occurrence data, which can be many different types. We have excellent field occurrence iNaturalist import. You can import from iNaturalist now, for example. There's two extra extensions that are available now. One is a very granular media extension. So it's not just the URL in the field, but it's all the attribution about that file, that media file that you want. So I would say that providing a link in a Darwin core file, the way it's kind of traditionally been done, has led to a number of different issues. But now we've got proper handling, at least in TaxonWorks, of media. And we also have very rich biological associations export. I have to be careful here. This is production. The way we set it up is a very simple ENL files, that a very simple EML editor here. So for example, this is the production version of the insect collection. And what happens, David, is essentially we create a URL that's a special purpose URL. And not only GBIF, I don't know if you guys can see this, but I just downloaded that whole Darwin core file from our API as well. So we are, in essence, becoming a GBIF-like provider. You can turn this on and serve your data, get this URL, share this URL. If I pasted this in, you could get it. And what happens is you can set a download age, and that single point API is kind of magic. If there is no file, it starts to build it in the background. If there is a file, it'll serve it to you. If you ask for the file and the file's out of date, it'll reset. It's an all-in-one hit. GBIF only re-indices their data every week, so it doesn't make much sense to go less than 6 days to our understanding. However, your users may need updated data all the time. This is another important part to point out, is that one of the things that TaxonWorks is different in a very nice way is that it's API driven. This is application program interface driven. This means that while the workbench is all private and you have to log in, once you turn it on, you can share your data in a lot of different ways. So we're creating web pages here, and maybe if you're familiar with this JSON format, but there's a data map behind this. So the data are all being shared from our TaxonWorks instance. So, and you can access that raw data as JSON right here. And it's pretty vanilla JSON. It's not anything special, but it's been extremely sort of useful to allow people to build on top of that. So this is a fairly big difference between our software and a lot of other software that is adding APIs on top of things. We built off of APIs from the beginning. And so that lets us share software in a lot of different ways. Sorry, share the data in a lot of different ways. Is there any way, Mario says, is there any way to make TaxonWorks load faster online and offline? Mario, I guess I'd want to know specific problems where you hit speed issues.
Yep.
Our instance of TaxonWorks, we run it in a very complicated setup here at Species File Group, because we run multiple instances and we run it pretty industrially. And there's a whole bunch of caching mechanisms that improve things. So I think we would have to know a little bit more. I do want to come back and say that these very cool things that are Orthoptera, this is created with a separate software called Taxon Pages that we won't get into. But Taxon Pages is super straightforward to use. There's an awesome video on YouTube now. That there's actually an app that can configure it, and you can serve TaxonWorks data in Taxon Pages using GitHub Pages. I won't show that. Maybe you caught this, but you can learn a lot more about that whole process there. And anybody who has a project can do this. We've had lots of students, Jacob, for example, who's here. We've had lots of people had quick success with creating their own sites and doing some really incredible things with these two frameworks, Taxon Pages and TaxonWorks.
So Mario, can you tell us where are you interacting with TaxonWorks? Can you, that's, in other words, yeah.
What you're saying, you're using the sandbox right now, Mario?
That's what I'm trying to figure out.
And maybe B, where are you?
Yeah, that's kind of like.
Typically, we don't see performance problems at that level, even for our sandboxes.
Exactly. So
it's quite a rare thing, even with load.
Well, that's what I'm sorry. I wasn't sure if it's a sandbox.
So Mario, are you running it offline? Aha. Okay. Yeah, Mario, you're missing. You need to run two servers. Almost certainly, you're not running the JavaScript serving server, so it's going to be very, very slow. So if you're running Rails S, you also need to run dot. And Mario, if you're at that level already, come join our chat. We have a developer chat, and we can help you instantly. We're on all the time. That's another one of our take homes. So you're going to need, I'm going to type this /bin Shaka Packer dev server. Something like that is the command you're going to want to run. Sorry for the technical geek out there. But when you have the application server and the JavaScript server running, it's going to feel almost like production, but almost certainly that's your problem. Okay, other questions before we take it back to this intersection back towards collections and research. Things you want to see. Does everybody sort of understand where they could come next if they wanted more help or learn more? A reminder that we talked about TaxonWorks together, and it's never too late. This is our annual conference. It's never too late to think about next year. It's a May conference. If you want to present anything on biodiversity informatics, we have wonderful conversations. The YouTube has a lot of information on that. You can kind of see a feel, but you could be thinking about next year's TaxonWorks together right now. Things that can make a difference. Again, we've given you kind of scratch the surface. David, just like we have the IDIG bio integration, we'll have catalog of life ChecklistBank integration. So almost probably well over a quarter of the names that go into ChecklistBank, this is the catalog of life framework, flow through TaxonWorks, are managed in a TaxonWorks project or are scripted through the TaxonWorks project.
So Matt, did you just, I want to go back. I'm multitasking here with reading questions. So some of you asked about taxon names in different ways in your questions, recognizing that something upwards of 20% going towards 30 are names that are managed in TaxonWorks and find their way into effectively the GBIF backbone. So those are, yeah, Matt's showing you this, but it's connected to a project that might be new for some of you called ChecklistBank, where researchers who create these name files end up in a resource that they can share. And then GBIF has I guess algorithm might be a good way to describe it, for pulling all this together and making the data in GBIF searchable from a taxonomic standpoint.
And I guess we should show that because it's kind of big that we should show auto select.
Yeah, I was thinking a lot of people when they first go, especially to digitize, or they've been doing it for a while and realize they need to add new names. This is a challenge, time consuming. Where do I go to find the name? How do I get it from the resource into my collection management software? Am I going to have to enter it one by one or create a spreadsheet or etc.? So we have a tool, y'all, called Auto Select that's fairly new.
Still in development.
Yeah.
In essence, like if you're building out maybe you've got an insect collection and you want to reference the plant names in your collection. So I can go, what's the oak? Boy, I'm pulling blanks already. Quercus. Thank you. Quercus. So what's happened very quickly, this is a completely empty project. So I've created a totally brand new project in my sandbox. And you can imagine these drop downs here being part of many of those tasks instead of where we're searching for things to link all our data together, where we're finding a determination, where we're referencing, creating a biological association. Imagine these inputs in those contexts. And so here I've searched for Quercus, and I've actually done multiple stages of search. So these little lines up here, this is a fast search, this is a deep search, and the gray ones are searches inside of the TaxonWorks project, and blue ones are outside of the TaxonWorks project. So if you watch carefully, I don't know if this will show up. When I type Quercus, it starts searching, misses. Now I'm hitting ChecklistBank. And now when I click it, I can import Quercus and all of the nomenclature, the authorships that are available, the identifiers that are coming from ChecklistBank on demand. And so I went from a project with no names to a project that has the capacity to adapt on the fly and hit those names in sort of two different projects. So this is, I think, a really amazing untapped part of what ChecklistBank and Catalog of Life have evolved to, that I think a lot of people haven't fully, even us, haven't fully made enough use of these APIs that have improved off of that framework. So a big thing to look for and ask your communities for is how can we do this two-way talking back and forth, because the foundation is there now to do that. A lot of the things that we wanted to do, it's now time to build the user interfaces and the tools. Debbie.
I just want to add, going through this, it's wicked cool at the front end and brand new. As Matt did that search and he went through inside fast and then inside what's called smart, and the third one went to ChecklistBank, but that third one is also customizable. If you want to point to a different API, a different online resource of a different list of names, you can customize that endpoint for yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Debbie. David, it's a great question. Again, of course, given ID Bio is winding down and this series is partially to celebrate accomplishments and offer a view for the future, what's next for TaxonWorks and how might you allay fears about its sustainability? So one of the things that we really try to do is be very transparent, David, about where we're at. And last year was a heck of a year for a lot of us in science. And let's just put it that way. And there's a lot of conversations about emerging technologies that I could talk about that are also raising a lot of questions. And we are not immune from that uncertainty and those questions. And that question that you ask is often the number one question all of our collaborators come to ask us for. So I can tell you how we're funded. So we are now, aside from, again, we'd have to do some brainstorming, but projects like ALA, GBIF, Encyclopedia of Life at some level is still alive. We are one of the oldest projects that are out there because of this endowment that we have. Now, it's important to understand that this endowment is atypical, right? There is risk associated with this, just like there is risk with everything. However, we feel that risk is very low. Every year you can come to our TaxonWorks business meeting and we give you two statuses, green, one for what's the revenue stream look like, and the other one is now what kind of pressure are we feeling like from administration, other angles. Those were both green right now for us and have been for a while. So I feel great. We all know that we're in crazy times. I feel great about our source of revenue. I feel it's unique. One of the reasons I came to this group is because I wanted to see that it makes as much impact and does as much good as it can. And I feel great about those resources. I also feel good about where administration is and where we're perceived, et cetera, as well. So I feel like part of it is that history has shown that we've lasted, and for various reasons, but a big part of it is that we've had that funding, and it's not insignificant. If you calculate 9 FTEs plus travel plus everything else, you can see that that's a lot of money. The other thing is that we are increasingly, you ask what's next, we're increasingly thinking about how to mitigate what happens if we go away. And that's one of the things that we said differentiates ourselves from a lot of the other platforms, is that you saw Mario. I don't know if Mario was just doing it while we're here, but he's offloaded the whole set of software, a snapshot of his database, etc., offline. Okay, so that's why TaxonWorks, getting back to what's TaxonWorks, TaxonWorks is software. Anybody can install it, right? We're trying to make it modular. We're trying to make it so that if we go away, you're still going to have that fixed set of data. We do a heck of a lot with our code base to make sure it's sustainable. And I would say this is another way we differentiate. We have a whole build pipeline. We have thousands and thousands of unit tests that help us kind of lock in the integrity of the project, that help us deal with pull requests, which is, if you're in this game, a whole new world thanks to these emerging technologies. We're getting inundated with, hey, here's a pull request, here's a change, right? So all these things that we heard about with respect to AI and the capacity to build software are impacting us in a big, big way, right? And so we're thinking about constantly spending energy, let's put it that way, allocating energy to think about how we're going to use those tools, how we may have to adapt, how we can be sustainable in the long time. So it's sort of nebulous, but I think transparency, education, providing resources that are understandable increasingly by individuals instead of massive organizations is one of our goals. But the reality is that you need a lot of infrastructure, and that costs a lot of money. And while we do a lot of things in collaboration, which seems to be people free, it's not free. It takes money. And the other thing that we alluded to is the species file group works as a collaboration, and we have to prioritize things. If you come to us and want to collaborate and you want to do it in the form of a grant, or you're bringing money to pay or offset our costs, that's going to jump, jump you up the priority list. It's just the way it is. We are dedicated, at least while I'm here and in part of a leadership role here, to continuing to meet that sort of classic taxonomic catalog that you see in the Orthoptera group, that you see that the data that's going in. If you're a taxonomist doing classic taxonomy, we're going to try to keep those resources free as long as we can. And in my level, they are going to remain free while I'm a leader here. We can imagine TaxonWorks being used in a lot of different ways: survey work, extension work, etc. There may be ways where that code base could be used in a monetary way. Specify, go look at what they did. They did an incredible job. The reality is that when you become successful, the more and more people you want to use you, the more resources you need. And there's lots of examples from that in our community that are familiar with, and we're not immune to that. We don't have the resources to scale to specify, for example, though we have similar resources to specify, right? But we're trying to do things a little bit more broadly. Anyways, I'll stop talking. Debbie, yeah.
I just wanted to bring it back around to a use case that's near and dear to our hearts, I would say. Christine White, rather, she writes, I want to use TaxonWorks for my research lab, smaller scale, but need organization. That's certainly a topic we'd love to talk about at TaxonWorks together on our Wednesday meetings. We have other examples of people who are doing that. And so if you want to sort of meet others who have that same use case and want to know about how to get started, we're happy to talk with you about that.
That really excites us. Like when you're a small lab and you depend on those kind of fundamental taxonomic resources, but yet maybe you're doing some molecular work, or you're doing some characterization of extracts or something like that, or you need to manage, if you need to manage the history, and you need to manage if sources and reference management is a part of your research, TaxonWorks is exceptional at source management and reference management.
So very briefly then, we didn't touch on that exactly. We do have a couple of, I'll just tease you guys with it. Come on Wednesday to talk more with us. We share some data across projects. Yeah. It's a giant experiment in the cloud. So you can imagine people data, something we've talked about a lot, and lots of IDIG bio events have mentioned this, where some data we manage, we're all duplicating effort across our different collection management or research software products. We have the same place names, we have the same people names, we have the same source data, in this case, publication data. So what happens when you share that so that someone else's effort benefits you and vice versa? And we have that in TaxonWorks. So one example, since David Shorthouse is here, people are an entity in TaxonWorks. They are things because they have identifiers. And so we make sure if you have a Wikidata ID for a person in your database, if you have an ORCID or other type of ID, you can actually link those directly to that person. But imagine what it means for sharing source data and others. There's much more to talk about.
I do want to point out that there's numerous other digitization frameworks that are possible. That comprehensive one is not the only one. There's a staged image format that you can tape off and customize your stage, and it will automatically parse these sections and do some OCR work and read. There's a grid digitizer, which is awesome for slide scanning or any other kind of gridded data. Imagine you gridded it out so you can draw a grid and then apply it and fractionate one image into multiple collection objects, for example.
And it auto increments the slide numbers.
Yeah, it'll auto increment your identifiers. It'll apply all of the preparation stuff. So you can carefully plan an image-based workflow, which you don't need to name your images. Don't do that. Use TaxonWorks and give up renaming your images. There's a freeform digitizer, so you can draw on images in the same way, except just like instead of creating rectangles, you can draw, and then you can layer these images back on, again applying attributes to all of these things. So I just wanted to point that we do have some more sophisticated ways of digitizing in situ as well. Okay, we're almost out of time. I'm not sure, Shyla, you're going to need some time to wrap up, but I did want to kind of come back and point out that let's see here. Back to this question. I'm not sure if we'll have time for 5, but I want to give you one sort of example of how we see research impacting collections and collections impacting research because of TaxonWorks as the framework for kind of drawing those together. We have a project called the Universal Chalcidoidea Database. It's the chalcidoid jewel wasps are perhaps one of the most complex, hyperdiverse groups of animals in the world. And there's tens of thousands of species. So there are 32,000 type specimen records in that database. And this is a database that was made by a researcher on the R side of it to gather all these data and make this nomenclatural work accessible. It took decades, took a decade to move it into TaxonWorks. We're a lot better at some level. It was early on now. And of those, and we're at the point now where we're formalizing that specimen nomenclature relationship that we showed you earlier on. In doing that for those 32,000 records that were in that original format, only 3,000 or so of those have a specimen identifier, right? And those are coming from the type collection at the British Museum, or the British Natural History Museum, UK, what it is now. The other 90% of the specimens that we have to stub have no physical identifier on the specimen. And I think many of you who are participating with IDIG Bio, you were concerned about what physical identifiers meant 15 years ago. This was a big change. But now it's kind of accepted, right? This is what collections do. But yet researchers are only kind of hitting this wall where we're like, we have to talk about how critically important it is when you're doing, your lab work in your own little lab. You want to manage your own little lab work to get those specimen identifiers on. It makes, I cannot emphasize it enough, the most difference in how we're managing that data. And so this is one spot where collections are way ahead of researchers in some ways. You would think, oh, not all researchers understand. Nuh-uh. Collections do. There's another more abstract one that I want to talk about. David asked, what are we thinking about in the future? We think about, Species Value Group thinks about code. The code is our collection objects, right? Little applications, little libraries. We're managing and curating bits of code. Well, how should we do that in the face of change, in the face of code that can adapt, etc.? Well, there's probably a lot of lessons from collections who have been doing this for hundreds of years about how to protect what you're curating, right? How to protect it, how to check for pests, maybe it's bugs. There's a lot of metaphors that we could take from thinking about collections to thinking about managing code, and we could learn that way. So this is, when you put collections and research side by side because of an application, these metaphors and these parallels start to happen. I'm curious if you guys think about any from that as a way to wrap it up. And feel free to open mic and talk too.
Yeah, Shyla and others here can turn on your mics if you'd like to talk. They've been doing all their talking in the chat, Matt, and you're teasing them with a quiz. I want to just reiterate, y'all. So imagine you're a graduate student who is now coalescing a data set you want to publish as a data paper, and you've got data from 15 different researchers. So now you have all these spreadsheets, and you open up that spreadsheet, and it has 15 rows. Maybe I'm just giving you an example, and it's exact same data for each row, but there's no catalog number or record number or identifier for any of those rows. And so maybe you, the researcher, magically knows which one of those is which, where you were when you wrote all that down. But as a data set, when you compile that, it's essentially impossible because you can't. You need those numbers in order to be this reproducibility, reusability, provenance, right? They need this. And it also could mean that you researchers move from a space where they at least connect them, sorry, create them for themselves if they're not there, or work with collections up front in order to help use the ones that where you're going to put your collection in the long run. Yeah. Ah. Mm. Who asked that question earlier? Somebody, how can we share lessons? There was a question about that. Or we talked about how we can share. Do y'all remember? Mm.
Dina asked a question. I think they're gone. I don't see them, but about them, I don't see the answer about micro CT images. Oh, maybe. Sorry, I didn't. Yeah, Dana is still here. Dana, we have a lot of collaborators who want to work with micro CT images. At the moment, we don't support like multi-TIFF format, and we don't have like MDL format, like the shape format support. But you're not alone in wanting that level of support. I would say like engage the issue tracker, engage us, let us know a little bit more about your use case. So we don't support it right now, but we have a lot of friends and colleagues who ask us that question. Yeah, so thanks, David.
How do researchers track impact? What are we, David, what are you pointing out that is different to you?
Shyla, I see we're wrapped. We're at 30 seconds. You probably need to jump in and talk at this point.
Yeah, if that's okay.
Yeah,
Um,
can I just say thanks to everybody for sticking with us, for contributing in the chat, and thank you, Shyla and Lauren and everybody at iDigBio for giving us this forum. And we hope to see all of you back in our forums. Special thanks to continue this conversation. Yeah.
And I just want to say thank you so much for presenting. It was a great way to kick off our second part of the webinar series. Before we conclude, I just want to remind everybody, like with all other iDigBio webinars, today's session was recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel. Our updated YouTube page is available, and you can find recordings from this webinar series as well as other iDigBio events. Our next webinar will take place on July 28th. From 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern. It is titled Field Stations, Marine Labs, and the Preservation of Biodiversity Collections. Registration is now open, so we encourage you to sign up now. We also just want to repeat today's urgent reminder. If your collection has images or any other media stored or linked to iDigBio servers, please act now. The University of Florida servers will shut down in August, and access to the media and images visible in the iDigBio portal will end August 31st. So just be sure to take care of that. Finally, be sure to follow us on social media to stay up to date on future events and announcements. And again, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you, guys.